You are welcome back to my channel, ladies and gentlemen. This is Toontum Network. My name is Cyrus, and I'm happy to have you here. Surprisingly, I'm getting new subscribers from all the way in North America, in the Caribbean, in Bahamas, in Barbados, all over that place, and in the UK, in Switzerland, in Norway, in Italy, France, Germany, and all over in Europe. I'm getting subscribers: Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Uganda, Kenya. Thank you so much for being a part of this show. And moving forward, if you are yet to subscribe, I encourage you to do that to support my channel. In today's episode, we are looking at a very controversial topic. It's a topic that gives certain people chest pains, and other people, it makes them agitated and pissed off. But that is the reason why I want to do this topic. It's titled The Giant of Africa. What does it mean for a country to be tagged or to be titled the Giant of Africa? Stick and stay with me. This is going to be fun. For many years, African countries have gone by different names and nicknames, titles, whatever you call it. And some of these names or titles are linked to whatever situation that was occurring at the time in that country. Sometimes even because of the topography or the vegetation of the place. And it's not just an African thing. That is the first thing I want to get out of the way. It is an international thing. Most countries out there, some of them have nicknames. For instance, Canada, it is called the maple leaf, simply because it has a wide growth of maple plant across the country. So it's not a new phenomenon. So let's take a look at a country like Zimbabwe, for instance. It was referred to as the breadbasket of Africa at a time when the white people, the white farmers in Zimbabwe, were in control of their agriculture. This was way before Mugabe took over the leadership of the country, and circumstances quickly changed. However, if you go through history, Zimbabwe was at no point in a position or in a capacity of producing food and vegetables for the African continent. Why were they given the title the breadbasket of Africa? It was based off on potential, because at the time, the white people had left the country, and it was assumed that the new leadership of the country were going to continue with the trajectory of producing. Remember, the white people were producing vegetables and cash crops like tobacco to supply the European market. So it was something based off on potential and not necessarily the real situation that was happening in Africa. The idea was they were going to produce the same volumes with the same setup, but this time to supply to the whole of Africa, or possibly just the SADC region, which unfortunately never materialized. Today, the same title, the breadbasket of Africa, is sort of given to Uganda based on the fertility of their lands and the comparative advantage they have in agriculture in all of the eastern part of Africa. The same thing can be said about Ghana. Remember, Ghana used to be called Gold Coast, not meaning that Ghana was the only country in Africa that had gold at the time. No, it was because Ghana was one of the few countries the Europeans discovered gold in Africa before they discovered gold in other African countries. And today, Ghana is called the gateway to Africa. This is merely because of the transatlantic slave trade that occurred in Ghana, in the Gold Coast, some time ago, leaving behind forts and dungeons and castles as evidence of what transpired. So whenever people with black descent from any part of the world, in the North America, in the South America, in the Caribbean, whenever they wanted to do a trace of where they came from, their ancestry, they had to connect it to Ghana because of all the action that transpired at the time. And for other economic reasons, most US presidents have consistently visited Ghana during their stay in power. And so it's not just an African thing giving titles or names to countries or cities. And now that will lead us to the real meat of today's episode, and that is, who is the real giant of Africa? First of all, you have to remember that there is a particular country in Africa that has been consistent with that title, and that is Nigeria. For so many years, it started somewhere in the 60s, before Pele of Brazil went there to play soccer. It was there, the title was given to them. But it wasn't popularized until around 2013 when Nigeria, the Super Eagles, won the African Cup of Nations. And then the name sort of gained momentum and became internationalized. That was when the title, the Giant of Africa, was sort of totally taken over by Nigeria. And by the way, those who are curious about why I mentioned Nigeria and South Africa in my recent videos, this is the answer. There is no way you can have any meaningful discussion or conversation about the North American continent without mentioning USA or Mexico. These are giants in that continent. It's the same thing happening in Africa. South Africa is a giant. Nigeria is a giant. There is no way you can talk about Africa without mentioning the giants in this land. It just doesn't make sense. And that is the reason why I do it. They literally dominate this continent. So instead of counting how many times I mention South Africa and Nigeria in my episodes, how about this? How about you fact check me? How about you check whether the information that I'm putting out there is actually true or misinformation? I think that would rather do us good than just to be uncomfortable with me mentioning names. It doesn't really help anybody. The title, The Giant of Africa, has always been claimed by Nigeria due to the vastness of their land, diversity in the tribes and languages, and most definitely because of the size of their population. Now, the important question you should ask is that a true statement? And my answer is this. Absolutely yes. Without any contention, that is a title nobody can claim from Nigeria, and this is why. In order for you to be called a giant of anything, you should be dominant in certain things. Things like size, finance, potential. There are a lot of things you have to dominate in order to even come close to being called the giant of anything. And as it stands now, Nigeria is the most populated country in Africa and the biggest economy in Africa. It has the largest number of tribes in Africa, the largest number of languages spoken in Africa. So by that metric alone, they are a force to contend with. They are the country in Africa most traveled out from, or most immigrated from. And here is why that is very, very important. It is a matter of being adventurous and possibly leaving a footprint. Remember, that is how we were dominated as Africans. Somebody had to leave their home country, travel all across the Atlantic to come discover us and then dominate us. So it is nothing wrong at all. You will find a Nigerian in almost every part of the world. If there is any likelihood of finding an African national in any part of the world, it is more likely you find a Nigerian than any other African national. Trust me, and that is not an exaggeration. It is home to the richest black man on the planet, not just in Africa, including America and the UK, who owns the biggest refinery in Africa. So it is just befitting for them to have that title based on the facts that I've put before you. And just like any populated city or country, they have their own issues. But the issues they are confronted with does not necessarily take away their potency. But one question you may pose is this: are they living up to the name, the title, the Giant of Africa? Well, that is a topic for another day. They have a lot of issues to deal with, including energy crisis, insecurities, poverty, joblessness, and all that. And the day they are able to work out their way out of that problem, they might possibly become the USA of Africa. But until then, I'll rather call South Africa the USA of Africa. There are titles we give to certain people, and other people look at them and they don't look anything like that title. But if you look at Nigeria, how they are dominant on this continent and outside of this continent, there is no way you could possibly come to the conclusion that they are not the giant of Africa. Indeed, they are the giant of Africa, or perhaps the sleeping giant of Africa. How about that? But in as much as you want to claim titles and names for yourselves, there are more bigger fishes to fry. Let's focus on building an Africa that solves its problems and overcomes its challenges. The youth need jobs, the roads are dusty, and the leaders doesn't look like they are being creative at this point. So let us rather focus on the more important things in society, specifically the things that are hurting our people, than just engaging in names and titles which does not necessarily have any impact on the poor person living in the street corner. How about we talk about economic empowerment? How about we talk about development? How about we supply water to our people and food and shelter and healthcare? All these things, we have to talk about them. So you may want to have your title, you may want to have your name, but at the end of the day, what the ordinary person is looking out for is how to make ends meet, and we should never lose focus on that. And now, for those who didn't know already, these are nicknames or titles for other African countries. Watch this. I encourage you to like, share, and comment if you're enjoying this podcast. And most importantly, please remember to subscribe and help me grow. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. And one major reason why most people consider Nigeria as the giant of Africa is this. Because of their sheer size, their population, they are able to take on music, movies, culture, whatever it is, even though it may not necessarily originate in Nigeria, and project it as far as it could go. Similar thing occurred in the case of Big Brother Africa. It was something that was started by South Africa in 2001. And then Nigeria came along and took it to another level because of their sheer size. And the show sort of gravitated towards Nigeria as though they were the originators of that gender experiment. But actually, South Africa was. So don't underestimate the power of numbers and the power of people immigrating or traveling from one place to the other, because that is how quick a culture or whatever can travel from one place to the other. But in conclusion, this is what I'll say. After doing my little research into this topic, 3 things are totally clear to me. Nigeria is indeed the giant of Africa. South Africa is the USA of Africa. And Ghana is the gateway to Africa. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. Please remember to like, share, leave a comment if you have to. I'll do my best to respond to your comments. Until I come your way again, God bless you, and it's bye-bye for now.